Sometimes the most dangerous secrets hide behind the most beautiful walls. In grand palaces where power flows like wine at royal banquets, where every smile masks a calculated move, and where silence can mean the difference between life and death, it often takes the pure heart of a child to see what adults choose to ignore. This is the story of how one little girl's simple observation brought down a conspiracy that reached the very heart of a kingdom. Her innocent words to a palace guard would expose a web of betrayal so shocking that it would shake the foundations of royal power itself. What she saw that day seemed small and unimportant to her young mind, but it was the thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. In a world where adults whisper in shadows and children are told to stay quiet, sometimes it's the smallest voice that carries the loudest truth. This is that story. A reminder that courage doesn't always wear a crown, and heroes don't always carry swords. Sometimes they skip through palace halls in little shoes, with hearts too pure to understand the weight of the secrets they're about to reveal. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the marble floors of Ravenscroft Palace as 8-year-old Elena Martinez skipped through the long corridors. Her small feet made soft tapping sounds against the polished stone, a rhythm that had become as familiar to the palace guards as their own heartbeats. Elena was the daughter of Maria Martinez, head of the royal kitchen staff, and had spent most of her young life wandering these grand halls while her mother worked. The palace had been Elena's playground for as long as she could remember. She knew every hidden alcove, every servant's passage, and every guard's routine. The towering walls decorated with centuries-old tapestries, the crystal chandeliers that caught sunlight like trapped rainbows, and the endless rooms filled with treasures from around the world. All of this was simply home to her. Captain Thomas Hartwell stood at his usual post near the main entrance, his weathered face stern but his eyes kind. At 52, he had served the royal family for over 20 years. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his silver hair neatly combed, and his posture straight as an arrow. The other guards respected him, the servants trusted him, and even the royal family valued his loyalty above all else. Elena had always been drawn to Captain Hartwell. While other guards would gently shoo her away when she got too curious, he would smile and sometimes even answer her endless questions about palace life. She had learned that he had a daughter about her age whom he rarely got to see because of his duties, and perhaps that's why he was always patient with her innocent chatter. This particular morning started like any other. Elena's mother had sent her upstairs to deliver fresh flowers to the Queen's morning room while the kitchen prepared for the day's meals. The little girl carried the crystal vase carefully, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she navigated the grand staircase. As she passed through the east wing, something caught her attention. Through a partially open door, she glimpsed Lord Blackwood, the king's most trusted advisor, speaking in hushed tones with two men she didn't recognize. This wasn't unusual. Lord Blackwood often had meetings, but something about their body language made Elena pause. The men were dressed in dark clothes that seemed out of place in the bright, ornate palace. One was tall and thin with a scar running down his left cheek, while the other was shorter and stockier, with hands that looked like they'd seen rough work. They didn't carry themselves like the usual diplomats or nobles who visited the palace. There was something dangerous in the way they moved, like cats ready to pounce. Elena pressed herself against the wall, her natural curiosity overcoming her usual obedience to stay out of adult conversations. She couldn't make out most of the words, but she heard Lord Blackwood's voice, usually smooth and cultured, now sharp with urgency. "The king trusts me completely," Lord Blackwood was saying. "He'll never suspect anything until it's too late. The coronation ceremony next week provides the perfect opportunity." The scarred man nodded grimly. "And you're certain the new security measures won't interfere?" "Captain Hartwell follows my recommendations without question," Lord Blackwood replied with a cold smile. "He's so focused on external threats that he'll never see what's coming from within." Elena's young mind didn't fully understand what she was hearing, but the tone frightened her. There was something wrong about the way Lord Blackwood spoke about Captain Hartwell, whom she knew to be nothing but loyal and good. The little girl clutched her flower vase tighter and hurried away, her heart beating fast. She completed her flower delivery to the Queen's room, but her mind kept returning to that strange conversation. Throughout the morning, as she helped her mother in the kitchen by sorting herbs and setting out fresh bread, Elena found herself watching Lord Blackwood whenever he appeared. He moved through the palace with his usual dignified bearing, speaking politely to everyone he encountered, but now Elena noticed things she'd never seen before. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. How his hand would move to touch a small leather pouch at his belt when he thought no one was looking. The fact that he always seemed to know exactly where the guards would be positioned before they took their posts. These small details, meaningless to most observers, stuck in Elena's mind like thorns. That afternoon, while her mother was busy preparing for the evening feast, Elena decided to explore. She had always been good at moving quietly through the palace, a skill that came naturally from years of trying not to disturb important adult conversations. She followed the servants' passages that ran parallel to the main corridors, allowing her to observe without being seen. From behind a tapestry, she watched Lord Blackwood meet again with the same two mysterious men in a different room. This time, their conversation was even more troubling. The Scar Man pulled out a rolled paper, what looked like blueprints or plans of some kind. Elena saw Lord Blackwood point to different spots on the paper while speaking in that same urgent, secretive tone. During the ceremony, all attention will be on the crown, Lord Blackwood explained. The guards will be focused outward, watching for threats from the crowd. No one will be watching the platform itself. The stocky man grunted his approval. And afterward, chaos, Lord Blackwood said with satisfaction. In the confusion, we'll be long gone with what we came for. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, the kingdom will have bigger problems to worry about. Elena's blood ran cold. She didn't understand all the implications, but she knew they were planning something terrible for the coronation ceremony. The grand celebration where the king would officially receive the ancient crown of sovereigns that had been passed down through his family for generations. The ceremony was only 5 days away, and the entire kingdom was excited about the festivities. The little girl backed away quietly, her mind racing. She needed to tell someone, but who? Her mother was always busy and might not take her seriously. The other servants would probably think she was making up stories. But Captain Hartwell, he had always listened to her before. Elena spent the rest of the afternoon working up her courage. She knew that what she'd overheard was important, but she also knew that adults often dismissed children's concerns. How could she make Captain Hartwell understand that something was terribly wrong? As evening approached and the palace settled into its quieter nighttime routine, Elena made her decision. She found Captain Hartwell making his rounds near the library, his boots clicking steadily against the marble floors. The corridors were dimly lit by flickering torches, creating dancing shadows on the walls. Captain Hartwell, she called softly, running to catch up with his long strides. He turned and smiled at her approach. Elena, what are you doing up so late? Shouldn't you be helping your mother finish up in the kitchen? I finished already, she said, suddenly, feeling nervous. Captain Hartwell, I need to tell you something important. Something in her tone made him stop walking and crouch down to her level, his kind eyes studying her face with concern. What is it, little one? You look worried. Elena took a deep breath. I saw Lord Blackwood talking to some strange men today. Twice. They were saying things about you and about the coronation ceremony, and it sounded bad. Captain Hartwell's expression grew more serious. What kind of things, Elena? They said the king trusts Lord Blackwood completely and that he'll never suspect anything until it's too late. They talked about the coronation being a perfect opportunity for something, and Lord Blackwood said you follow his recommendations without question. Elena's words tumbled out quickly, as if she was afraid she might lose her nerve. He said you'd never see what's coming from within. The captain's face had gone very still. These men Lord Blackwood was speaking with. Can you describe them? Elena nodded eagerly, relieved that he was taking her seriously. One was tall and thin with a big scar on his cheek. The other was shorter and looked really strong, like he works with his hands. They didn't look like the usual people who visit the palace. They looked scary. Captain Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with thought. Elena watched his face, seeing something she'd never seen there before. Doubt. For the first time in her memory, the unshakable Captain Hartwell looked uncertain. "Elena," he said carefully, "I need you to promise me something. Don't tell anyone else about this conversation, not even your mother. Can you do that for me?" She nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. Good girl." He stood up slowly, his hand moving unconsciously to rest on his sword hilt. "I want you to stay close to your mother over the next few days. Don't go wandering around the palace alone like you usually do. Can you promise me that too?" "But why promise me, Elena?" The intensity in his voice scared her a little, but she nodded again. "I promise." Captain Hartwell watched her hurry back toward the kitchen quarters, his mind already racing with implications. Lord Blackwood had indeed been making more security recommendations than usual lately, all of which seemed perfectly reasonable on the surface. Adjustments to guard rotations, changes to patrol routes, modifications to the ceremony protocols, small things that individually meant nothing, but together could create significant vulnerabilities. That night, after Elena was safely in bed in the small room she shared with her mother above the kitchen, Captain Hartwell began his own quiet investigation. He reviewed every security recommendation Lord Blackwood had made in the past month, cross-referencing them with the palace's standard protocols. What he found made his blood run cold. Every single change would create blind spots during the coronation ceremony. The modified guard positions would leave the ceremonial platform less protected than usual. The new patrol routes would pull security away from critical areas at precisely the wrong times. The revised crowd control measures would actually make it easier for unauthorized people to get close to the king. Individually, these changes seemed minor. Together, they painted a picture of systematic sabotage. Captain Hartwell sat in his small office until dawn, staring at the papers spread across his desk. Lord Blackwood, the king's most trusted advisor, a man who had served the crown faithfully for over 15 years, was planning something that could only be described as treason. And, if not for the innocent observation of a curious 8-year-old girl, no one would have suspected until it was too late. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on him like a physical force. He had to act, but carefully. If Lord Blackwood was indeed planning something for the coronation, confronting him directly could trigger whatever plot was in motion. But if he did nothing, the consequences could be catastrophic. As the first light of dawn crept through his window, Captain Hartwell made his decision. He would need help, but he would have to choose his allies very carefully. In a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the palace hierarchy, trust had become the most precious and dangerous commodity of all. Elena had done her part by bringing him this information. Now it was up to him to figure out how to use it to protect the king and the kingdom. The coronation was only 4 days away, and somewhere in the palace, Lord Blackwood was putting the finishing touches on a plan that could change everything forever. Captain Hartwell barely slept that night. Every shadow in his room seemed to hide a threat. Every sound in the corridor made him reach for his sword. By morning, he had made a crucial decision. He couldn't handle this alone, but he also couldn't trust anyone within the normal palace hierarchy. Lord Blackwood's influence ran too deep, and there was no way to know who else might be involved in whatever conspiracy was brewing. The captain's first move was to contact his most trusted friend outside the palace walls, Sir Marcus Stone, a retired knight who now ran a small training academy for young soldiers in the village. Marcus had served alongside Thomas for many years before leaving palace service to start his family. If anyone could help him navigate this dangerous situation, it would be Marcus. Using the pretense of discussing security arrangements for the coronation festivities in the village, Captain Hartwell arranged to meet Marcus at a small tavern on the outskirts of town that afternoon. He told his second-in-command that he was conducting a routine inspection of the outer perimeter defenses, something he did regularly enough that it wouldn't raise suspicions. Meanwhile, Elena tried her best to follow Captain Hartwell's instructions to stay close to her mother and avoid wandering the palace alone. But staying in one place had never been easy for her, and her curiosity about the mysterious conversation she'd overheard continued to gnaw her. Despite her promise, she found herself watching Lord Blackwood more carefully whenever their paths crossed in the palace corridors. What she observed over the next day only deepened her concerns. Lord Blackwood seemed different somehow, more tense, more watchful. She noticed him having brief, whispered conversations with palace staff members she'd never seen him speak to before. There was the night janitor who cleaned the ceremonial halls, the messenger who carried correspondence between different wings of the palace, and even one of the younger kitchen maids who helped serve meals in the great dining hall. Each conversation was brief and appeared casual to anyone watching, but Elena's sharp young eyes caught the way Lord Blackwood would slip small pieces of paper to these people, always when he thought no one was looking. The recipients would quickly pocket the papers without reading them, their faces carefully neutral, but Elena could see the tension in their body language. That afternoon, Captain Hartwell met Marcus Stone at the Eagle's Rest Tavern, a modest establishment that catered mainly to traveling merchants and local farmers. The two old friends embraced warmly, but Marcus immediately noticed the strain in Thomas's face. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Marcus observed as they settled into a corner booth away from other patrons. "I haven't," Thomas admitted quietly. "Marcus, I need your help with something that could be extremely dangerous. Before I tell you anything, I need you to know that simply knowing what I'm about to share could put your life at risk." Marcus Stone was a man who had faced down charging enemy cavalry and fought through siege warfare. Very little frightened him anymore. But the genuine fear in his old friend's voice made him lean forward with complete attention. "Tell me," Marcus said simply. Captain Hartwell recounted Elena's observations and his own subsequent investigation into Lord Blackwood's security recommendations. As he spoke, Marcus's expression grew increasingly grim. When Thomas finished, both men sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the implications settling between them. "The crown of sovereigns," Marcus said finally. "That's what they're after, isn't it?" Thomas nodded. "It has to be. The crown is priceless beyond measure, not just for the gold and jewels, but for its historical significance. There are collectors in other kingdoms who would pay fortunes for it, no questions asked. But more than that, stealing the crown during the coronation ceremony would be a blow to the monarchy's legitimacy that could destabilize the entire kingdom. And Lord Blackwood is positioned to make it happen." Marcus continued the thought. "He knows every security protocol, every guard position, every contingency plan. He could create the perfect opportunity and then fade into the background while chaos erupts." The two men began to plan their response carefully. They couldn't go to the king directly. Lord Blackwood's influence was too strong, and without concrete proof, their accusations would likely be dismissed as paranoid fantasy. They needed to catch the conspirators in the act, or at least gather enough evidence to expose the plot before it could unfold. "We'll need to identify everyone involved," Thomas said. "The little girl mentioned 2 strangers, but there have to be others. A plan this sophisticated requires inside help from multiple sources." Marcus agreed. "I can bring in some of my former students, young knights who are hungry to prove themselves and haven't been around long enough to be compromised. We'll need extra eyes and ears, people who can watch the watchers without being noticed." Meanwhile, back at the palace, Elena was struggling with her promise to stay out of trouble. Late that evening, while helping her mother clean up after the dinner service, she overheard 2 kitchen maids whispering about strange instructions they'd received. "I don't understand why Lord Blackwood wants us to change the serving schedule," one was saying. "The coronation feast has been planned for months. Just do what he says," the other replied nervously. "He said it's for security reasons, something about keeping the royal family safer during the ceremony." Elena's heart began to race. Lord Blackwood was manipulating the kitchen staff too, changing routines that had been carefully planned. She thought about her promise to Captain Hartwell, but she also knew that this information might be important. After an internal struggle that lasted most of the night, she decided she had to find a way to help without directly breaking her promise not to wander the palace alone. The next morning, Elena convinced her mother to let her help deliver breakfast to the guards' quarters, something she'd done many times before. This would allow her to pass information to Captain Hartwell without technically disobeying his instructions. Since she wouldn't be wandering alone, she'd be working with her mother. When they reached the guards' common room, Elena lingered while her mother distributed fresh bread and porridge. She caught Captain Hartwell's eye and nodded toward a quiet corner. Understanding her signal, he approached casually. "Good morning, Elena. How are you helping your mother today?" "Captain Hartwell," she whispered urgently. "Lord Blackwood is changing things in the kitchen too. He's told the maids to adjust the serving schedule for the coronation feast. They don't understand why, but they're scared not to obey." The captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of changes?" "Different people serving different courses, new timing for when food gets brought out, even changes to who's allowed in the dining hall during the feast." Elena glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "The maids are confused because all the changes make their work harder, not easier." Captain Hartwell nodded gravely. "You've done well to tell me this, Elena. Now I need you to go back to your mother and act like nothing is wrong. Can you do that?" She nodded and hurried back to her mother's side, leaving the captain to process this new information. The changes to the kitchen schedule were clearly designed to create more confusion and provide additional cover for whatever Lord Blackwood had planned. If his people could control who had access to different parts of the palace during the ceremony, they could move freely while everyone else was restricted to their assigned positions. That afternoon, Captain Hartwell's covert investigation took a dangerous turn. Marcus had arrived at the palace with 3 of his most trusted former students, young knights who were introduced as additional security consultants for the coronation. Their real mission was to conduct surveillance on Lord Blackwood and his suspected co-conspirators. One of these young knights, Sir David Fletcher, had been tasked with following the mysterious scarred man Elena had described. Using contacts in the village, Marcus had identified the stranger as Vincent Cross, a mercenary with a reputation for sophisticated thefts and political disruption. Cross was staying at a boarding house on the edge of town, and Sir David had been watching his movements for the past day. What Sir David discovered was alarming. Cross had been meeting regularly with at least 6 different people who all had connections to the palace: servants, guards, even a minor court official. Each meeting was brief and appeared coincidental, but the pattern was clear to anyone looking for it. Lord Blackwood had assembled a network of inside accomplices, each playing a small role in a larger scheme. More disturbing still, Sir David had observed Cross receiving a package from a known arms dealer, a man who specialized in providing weapons that could be easily concealed and used for quick, deadly work. The coronation was now only 2 days away, and the conspiracy was clearly moving into its final phase. Captain Hartwell called an urgent meeting with Marcus and the young knights that evening in an abandoned guardhouse on the palace grounds. As he shared what they'd learned, the full scope of the plot began to emerge. They're not just planning to steal the crown, Thomas realized as he laid out all the evidence they'd gathered. They're planning to create a massacre. The weapons, the changes to serving schedules, the manipulation of guard positions. They want chaos and bloodshed, not just theft. Marcus studied the information with a strategic mind. If they kill the king during the coronation ceremony, especially if they can make it look like an attack from foreign enemies or domestic rebels, the kingdom will be thrown into civil war. In that chaos, they can steal whatever they want and disappear before order is restored. Sir David raised a crucial question. Do we have enough evidence to convince the king to cancel or postpone the ceremony? Captain Hartwell shook his head grimly. Lord Blackwood's influence is too strong. He could explain away most of what we've discovered, and the king trusts him completely. We need to catch them in the act, but in a way that protects the royal family. Then we set our own trap, Marcus said decisively. We let them think their plan is proceeding normally, but we'll be ready for them. The group spent the rest of the night planning their counter-strategy. They would need to position their own people to intercept the attack, while making it appear that security was proceeding according to Lord Blackwood's compromised arrangements. It would be a dangerous game, requiring precise timing and nerves of steel. Unknown to them, Elena had been unable to sleep and had seen the lights in the old guardhouse. Her curiosity overcoming her caution, she had crept close enough to hear parts of their discussion. The little girl now understood that the coronation ceremony would be much more dangerous than anyone realized, and that Captain Hartwell and his friend were planning something very risky to stop it. As she returned quietly to her room, Elena made a decision that would prove crucial in the hours to come. She might be just a child, but she had started this chain of events with her observations. If Captain Hartwell and his allies were going to risk their lives to protect the king and the kingdom, she was determined to help in whatever way she could. The coronation was tomorrow, and Elena Martinez was about to play a role in saving a kingdom that no one, not even she could have imagined when she first noticed something wrong with Lord Blackwood's secretive meetings. The innocent little girl who had stumbled upon a conspiracy was about to become a key player in stopping it, though the true test of courage still lay ahead. The morning of the coronation dawned bright and clear, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating the ancient ceremony that would officially invest King Aldrich with the crown of sovereigns. The palace buzzed with activity as servants made final preparations, guards took their positions, and nobles from across the kingdom gathered in their finest clothing for the historic event. Elena woke early, her stomach churning with nervous energy. She knew that somewhere in the beautiful chaos of preparation, a deadly plot was about to unfold. The little girl dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple but clean blue frock that her mother had sewn for special occasions, and tried to appear normal as she helped with breakfast preparations in the kitchen. But Elena had made her own preparations the night before. While everyone slept, she had carefully explored the palace one last time, paying special attention to the routes between the kitchen, the great hall where the ceremony would take place, and the various hiding spots she discovered over the years. If Captain Hartwell and his friends needed help, she wanted to be ready to provide it. Captain Hartwell had barely slept at all. He and Marcus had spent most of the night positioning their allies throughout the palace in ways that wouldn't arouse Lord Blackwood's suspicions. Sir David Fletcher was disguised as a visiting noble from a distant province, allowing him to move freely among the crowd. The other young knights had been integrated into the regular guard rotations, but with secret instructions that differed from the official security plan. The most challenging aspect of their counterplan was that they had to let Lord Blackwood believe everything was proceeding according to his compromised security arrangements while actually preparing to stop him. This meant that some of the legitimate guards would unknowingly be following the traitor's instructions, creating additional confusion that Thomas and his allies would have to navigate carefully. As the morning progressed, the Great Hall was transformed into a magnificent ceremony space. The ancient throne, carved from a single piece of black oak and inlaid with precious metals, was positioned at the center of a raised platform. Hundreds of chairs were arranged in precise rows for the noble guests, while standing areas along the walls would accommodate court officials and palace staff. The crown of sovereigns itself was displayed on a special pedestal beside the throne, its ancient gold gleaming under the light of dozens of crystal chandeliers. Embedded with rubies, emeralds, and diamonds collected over centuries of royal rule, the crown was truly one of the most beautiful and valuable artifacts in the known world. Looking at it, Captain Hartwell could understand why it would attract the attention of ambitious thieves, but he also knew its symbolic value far exceeded its material worth. Lord Blackwood moved through the preparations with his usual calm efficiency, checking details and issuing last-minute instructions to various staff members. To anyone watching, he appeared to be exactly what he was supposed to be, the king's most trusted advisor, ensuring that this crucial ceremony proceeded flawlessly. But Captain Hartwell, now watching him with suspicious eyes, could see the subtle signs of tension beneath the polished exterior. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at noon, with the actual crowning taking place at exactly 12:30. At 11 o'clock, as guests began arriving and taking their seats, Elena positioned herself in the kitchen where she could monitor the food service while also keeping an eye on the corridors leading to the Great Hall. What she saw alarmed her. The kitchen maid's Lord Blackwood had spoken to her indeed, following new instructions, but their movements seemed designed to create gaps in the normal flow of palace staff through certain areas. More concerning, Elena noticed several people she didn't recognize mixed in with the legitimate servants. People who moved with the same dangerous grace she'd observed in the scarred man and his stocky companion. At 11:15, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Instead of staying safely in the kitchen as promised, she slipped away from her mother and made her way through the servant passages to find Captain Hartwell. She had to warn him that the infiltrators were already inside the palace and positioning themselves for whatever they planned to do. She found him in the anteroom adjacent to the Great Hall, making final checks on the security arrangements with several guards who didn't know their captain suspected the very man who had given them their orders. "Captain Hartwell," Elena whispered, tugging on his uniform sleeve with urgent small hands. He turned, and his face immediately showed both concern and mild irritation that she had disobeyed his instructions. But the expression in her eyes told him this was important. "Elena, you're supposed to be Dash. There are strange people in the kitchen," she interrupted in a low, urgent voice. "People I've never seen before, but they're dressed like servants. They're moving around like they know exactly where everything is, but they keep looking around like they're planning something." Captain Hartwell's blood ran cold. If the conspirators were already inside and positioned, the attack could begin at any moment. He glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:20. The ceremony would begin in 40 minutes. "How many?" he asked quietly. "I counted at least 4, maybe more." They split up and went in different directions after they left the kitchen. Thomas made a rapid decision. He couldn't alert his own guards without potentially exposing his counterplan, but he needed to get word to Marcus and the others immediately. The situation was escalating faster than they had anticipated. "Elena, I need you to do something very important and very dangerous," he said, kneeling down at her eye level. "Can you find Sir Marcus Stone? He should be near the east entrance, watching the arriving guests." She nodded quickly. "Tell him exactly what you just told me, and say that Captain Hartwell says the game has begun early. He'll understand. Then I need you to go back to your mother and stay with her no matter what happens. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Elena said solemnly, then paused. "Captain Hartwell, are you going to be okay?" The question, asked with such genuine concern by this brave little girl who had already done so much to help, nearly broke his heart. "I'm going to do everything I can to keep everyone safe, including you and your mother. Now go quickly." Elena ran through the palace corridors faster than she ever had before, her small feet silent on the marble floors. She found Sir Marcus exactly where Captain Hartwell had said he would be, dressed in the formal attire of a minor court official and observing the arriving guests with careful attention. When she delivered the message, Marcus immediately understood its significance. The conspirators weren't waiting for the ceremony to begin. They were moving into position during the arrival period when there was still controlled chaos and movement throughout the palace. This suggested they planned to strike during the ceremony itself, when all attention would be focused on the throne and the crowning moment. "Thank you, brave girl," Marcus said softly. "Now do as the captain instructed and stay close to your mother." But as Elena hurried back toward the kitchen, she encountered something that made her freeze in terror. Lord Blackwood was standing in one of the main corridors, speaking in low tones with the scarred man she'd seen before. They were positioned where they could see both the entrance to the Great Hall and the passages leading to the kitchen areas. "The signal will come when the crown is lifted," Lord Blackwood was saying. "That's when everyone's attention will be completely focused on the ceremony. You'll have perhaps 30 seconds while the crowd is looking at the king. "And the exits?" the Scar Man asked. "Secured. My people will ensure that certain doors become temporarily blocked at precisely the right moment. In the confusion that follows, no one will notice a few staff members slipping away through the service entrances." Elena pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they would hear it. But the conversation continued without either man noticing her presence. "What about Captain Hartwell?" the scarred man continued. "You said he might be a problem." Lord Blackwood's voice took on a cold tone that made Elena's skin crawl. "Captain Hartwell will be dealing with other emergencies. I've arranged several distractions that will pull his attention in different directions. By the time he realizes what's really happening, we'll be gone and the kingdom will be in chaos." The scarred man nodded and melted away into the crowd of arriving guests, leaving Lord Blackwood standing alone for a moment. Elena watched in fascination as the man's entire demeanor changed. The cold, calculating expression disappeared, replaced by the familiar warm smile and dignified bearing that everyone in the palace trusted. In the space of a few seconds, he transformed from a dangerous conspirator back into the king's beloved advisor. Elena waited until Lord Blackwood had moved on before emerging from her hiding spot. Now she faced a terrible dilemma. She had promised Captain Hartwell she would go back to her mother and stay safe, but she had just learned crucial information about the timing and method of the attack. The conspirators planned to strike when the crown was lifted, the climactic moment of the ceremony when the king would officially receive his inheritance. More importantly, she now knew that Lord Blackwood had planned distractions to pull Captain Hartwell away from the Great Hall at the critical moment. Whatever traps he had prepared, they were designed to leave the ceremony vulnerable precisely when the attack would occur. Elena knew she had to get this information to Captain Hartwell or Sir Marcus, but time was running short. The ceremony would begin in less than 20 minutes, and she could hear the sounds of the Great Hall filling with guests. The moment of truth was approaching rapidly. Making another decision that went against her promise but felt absolutely necessary, Elena headed toward the Great Hall. She would find a way to warn Captain Hartwell about Lord Blackwood's distractions, even if it meant putting herself in danger. As she approached the ceremonial area, Elena could see that the scene was magnificent. Hundreds of nobles in their finest clothing filled the Great Hall, their conversations creating a buzz of excitement that echoed off the high ceilings. Musicians in the gallery played soft, stately melodies that added to the sense of historical importance. Guards stood at attention around the perimeter, their uniforms perfectly pressed and their bearing proud and alert. But Elena, now educated in the art of seeing beneath surface appearances, could spot the signs of the conspiracy hidden within the legitimate ceremony. She saw palace staff members positioned in unusual locations, their eyes alert for signals rather than focused on their assigned duties. She noticed that some of the guards were standing in positions that, while they looked proper, actually created blind spots that hadn't existed in previous royal ceremonies she'd witnessed. At exactly noon, the great doors of the hall opened to admit King Aldrich himself. A tall, dignified man in his 50s, he wore ceremonial robes of deep purple velvet trimmed with gold thread. The crown that would soon rest on his head had been worn by his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather before him, connecting him to a legacy that stretched back centuries. The crowd rose as one, their voices joining in the traditional anthem that marked the beginning of all royal ceremonies. Elena felt tears come to her eyes as she watched this powerful moment, knowing that hidden enemies were preparing to turn it into a scene of violence and chaos. As the king processed down the central aisle toward the throne, Elena spotted Captain Hartwell standing at attention near the platform. His expression was calm and professional, but she could see the tension in his posture. He was ready for trouble, but he didn't know about Lord Blackwood's planned distractions. The ceremony proceeded with ancient ritual precision. Lord Blackwood, in his role as chief advisor, read proclamations and led the assembly through various traditional responses. His voice was strong and clear, his manner appropriately solemn, and his loyalty to the crown appeared absolute to everyone watching. Only Elena, Captain Hartwell, and their secret allies knew the truth behind his perfect performance. At 12:25, the climactic moment approached. King Aldrich knelt before the throne as Lord Blackwood lifted the crown of sovereigns from its pedestal. The ancient gold caught the light from the chandeliers, sending flashes of brilliance throughout the great hall. Every eye in the room focused on the crown as Lord Blackwood raised it high above the king's head. By the authority vested in me by God and by the ancient laws of this realm, Lord Blackwood intoned in his most ceremonial voice, I crown the Aldrich, rightful king and sovereign lord of Dash. At that moment, three things happened simultaneously. First, as Lord Blackwood had planned, several emergencies erupted in different parts of the palace. Fire bells began ringing in the east wing, shouts of intruder in the treasury echoed from the west wing, and reports of a collapsed wall in the north tower crackled through the guards' communication system. These carefully orchestrated distractions were designed to pull security personnel away from the Great Hall at the crucial moment. Second, Elena saw the scarred man and his companions moving through the crowd toward the throne platform, their hands reaching inside their clothing for concealed weapons. The moment Lord Blackwood placed the crown on the king's head would be their signal to attack, creating chaos while their leader made off with the prize. Third, and most importantly, Elena did something that no one, not the conspirators, not Captain Hartwell, not even she herself, had planned. At the exact moment when Lord Blackwood began to lower the crown toward King Aldrich's head, Elena Martinez, 8 years old and barely tall enough to see over the adults around her, stood up on her chair and shouted at the top of her lungs, Captain Hartwell, Lord Blackwood is the bad man. He's working with the scary people. They're going to hurt the king. The great hall erupted into shocked silence, then immediate chaos. Lord Blackwood's hand froze with the crown inches above the king's head. The scar man and his accomplices found themselves suddenly exposed as every eye in the room turned to look at them. Captain Hartwell, instead of being distracted by the false emergencies, was now completely alert to the real danger in the Great Hall itself. In that moment of confusion, everything that had been carefully planned by both sides fell apart, and the true battle for the crown began. Elena's innocent voice, cutting through centuries of ceremony and tradition, had just changed the course of history. The little girl who had noticed something wrong had made sure that everyone else would notice too, at exactly the moment when it mattered most. The confrontation that followed would be remembered for generations, but it began with the clear, fearless voice of a child who refused to stay silent when she knew something was terribly wrong. What happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest person in a room can be the one who saves everyone else, and that truth spoken by an innocent heart is more powerful than the most sophisticated conspiracy. The crown would find its way to the rightful king's head, but only after a battle that began with Elena's courageous shout and ended with the exposure of treachery at the highest levels of the kingdom. In the end, the palace-shaking secret was revealed not through careful investigation or complex spy work, but through the simple honesty of a little girl who saw something wrong and refused to keep quiet about it. Elena Martinez had started this story by alerting a guard, and she finished it by alerting an entire kingdom. The crown was safe, the king was protected, and the conspiracy was exposed, all because one small voice had the courage to speak up when it mattered most.